Welcome, my favorite people, the rare gems. Sometimes attraction has less to do with who someone is and more to do with what they make you feel about yourself. Why do some men in marriages become unusually fascinated by Sigma women who are independent, private, emotionally controlled, and difficult to read? And why can that attraction sometimes appear stronger than the interest shown by single men? The answer is not simply that Sigma females are more attractive. That explanation is too easy. The deeper issue involves psychology, fantasy, novelty, emotional projection, and the strange effect that boundaries can have on desire. A married man may look at an independent woman and see something he feels is missing from his own life. He may mistake curiosity for chemistry, mystery for compatibility, or the excitement of something unfamiliar for genuine emotional connection. Sometimes he is attracted to her. Other times, he is attracted to the version of himself he imagines becoming around her. And there is another uncomfortable truth. Being unavailable can make fantasy easier than reality. Don't get it twisted. In most cases, these men simply misunderstand a Sigma female. She isn't uninterested in men. She's just comfortable being herself, and ironically, that authenticity is exactly what makes her so intriguing to them. In this video, we are going beyond the usual Sigma talking points and examining what may actually be happening beneath the surface. Stay until the end, because some of these reasons may completely change how you understand this type of attraction. And don't forget to share your thoughts, share this video, and subscribe to join our community. Thank you for your support. Now, let's get started. The rare gems. Number 1. He may be chasing what his marriage no longer makes novel. There is something about familiarity that people rarely talk about honestly. The same person you once could not wait to see can eventually become part of your normal routine. Not necessarily because the love has disappeared, but because the brain becomes comfortable with what it already knows. Marriage naturally comes with repetition. You wake up beside the same person, have many of the same conversations, handle similar responsibilities, solve similar problems, and move through familiar routines. There is beauty in that stability, but there can also be a psychological side effect. Familiarity can make even meaningful things feel ordinary. Then an unfamiliar woman appears. She has different opinions, different habits, a different way of communicating, and experiences he has never heard about. A simple conversation can suddenly feel unusually interesting, because there is so much information his mind has not processed before. He may start thinking about her after the conversation ends, not necessarily because she is more compatible with him, but because she represents something new. For example, a married man may spend years having predictable conversations at home about bills, children, work, errands, and daily responsibilities. Then he meets a woman who talks passionately about something completely different. She challenges an idea he has held for years or introduces him to a perspective he has never considered. Suddenly, a 20-minute conversation feels more exciting than it logically should. This is where people can get themselves into trouble. He may interpret that excitement as proof that she is special, when part of the feeling may simply come from novelty. She has not yet become associated with arguments, responsibilities, disappointing days, financial pressure, household problems, or boring Tuesday evenings. He is meeting the edited beginning of an experience, while his marriage contains the entire reality of life together. That distinction matters. Sometimes, what a person desperately misses is not another person. It is the feeling of discovering something again. The unfamiliar woman may become a symbol of excitement, freedom, curiosity, or a life that feels less predictable. And if he is not honest with himself, he may chase her when what he is actually chasing is the feeling of being surprised by life again. Number 2. She doesn't give him the emotional reward he expects. If he sends a message and receives an ordinary response instead of excitement, he may become more interested rather than less. The strange thing about attraction is that certainty does not always make people more interested. Sometimes uncertainty does the opposite. It keeps their mind working. A married man may be accustomed to predictable emotional responses. He sends a message, he gets a warm reply. He tells a joke, someone laughs. He gives attention, he receives attention in return. Then he meets a woman who does not respond according to the script he is used to. He sends her a message, and she replies normally. No excitement, no long conversation, no obvious attempt to keep him talking. Another time, she might respond warmly and have a genuinely interesting conversation with him. Then she goes back to her normal life. That inconsistency can create a strange psychological effect. He may start wondering, does she actually like talking to me? Then he thinks about the conversation again. He checks his phone. He remembers something she said. Suddenly, the lack of certainty is occupying more mental space than a clear answer might have. This is where unpredictable attention can become powerful. When a response is completely predictable, the brain quickly learns the pattern. But when attention is occasional and uncertain, a person may keep checking for the next rewarding moment. Think about someone waiting for a message that could arrive at any moment. The waiting itself becomes part of the experience. But here is the uncomfortable truth. He may mistake psychological tension for deep attraction. He might tell himself, there is something different about her, when part of what he is experiencing is simply the frustration of not knowing where he stands. And that can become even stronger when he is already married, because his interaction with her may feel like something outside his normal emotional routine. The woman may not be deliberately creating this effect at all. She may simply be living her life, responding when she feels like responding, and refusing to manufacture excitement for someone else. Sometimes the person who gives you the least emotional certainty occupies the most space in your mind, not because they gave you everything, but because they left you wondering what you could never quite get. Number 3. The no-neediness signal. Her lack of obvious need changes the psychological dynamic. There is a powerful difference between someone who wants your attention and someone who simply enjoys talking to you without needing anything from you. This can become especially noticeable to a married man who is used to relationships built around familiar expectations. At home, there are responsibilities, emotional routines, shared decisions, and years of history. Then he meets a woman who seems perfectly comfortable whether he notices her or not. She is not trying to impress him. She is not constantly finding reasons to talk to him. She is not changing her personality to keep his interest. If he gives her attention, she responds naturally. If he becomes busy, she continues with her own life. That can create a completely different psychological experience. For example, imagine a man compliments her appearance. He expects the usual reaction, perhaps excitement, flirting, or an attempt to keep the conversation going. Instead, she simply smiles, says, "Thank you," and continues what she was doing. That small moment can stay in his mind. Why? Because there was no obvious transaction. He gave attention, but she did not immediately give him emotional currency in return. And when someone is accustomed to attention producing a predictable response, the absence of that response can become surprisingly interesting. But here is where people need to be careful. Her lack of neediness does not automatically mean she is secretly more desirable, emotionally superior, or playing some clever game. She may simply have no particular interest in getting something from him. That distinction is important. Sometimes a person becomes attractive because they are difficult to impress. But sometimes they become attractive because their behavior forces someone else to confront an uncomfortable question. Why do I care so much about getting a reaction from this person? And that question can reveal more about the man than it reveals about the woman. He may begin chasing the feeling of being wanted by someone who does not appear to need him. The attraction then becomes less about building something real and more about trying to change the emotional balance. The irony is that her greatest effect may come from doing absolutely nothing special. She simply remains herself, and he starts wondering why her attention suddenly matters so much to him. Number 4. She doesn't try to change him. This isn't merely about being easygoing, it's about non-interference. She doesn't volunteer to repair his marriage, redesign his personality, manage his choices, or become his unpaid therapist. There is a particular kind of relief that comes from being around someone who is not trying to redesign your life. A married man may already live inside a world full of expectations. His wife may have opinions about his habits, his priorities, his friendships, his career, his communication, and the things he needs to improve. Some of those conversations may be completely reasonable. That is what happens when two people build a life together. Real relationships require communication, compromise, and sometimes difficult conversations. Then he meets a woman who does none of that. She does not lecture him about his marriage. She does not tell him what kind of husband he should be. She does not offer herself as the person who can finally understand him. She does not volunteer to fix his emotional problems or take responsibility for choices that belong to him. That neutrality can feel surprisingly refreshing. For example, if he complains about an argument with his wife, she might simply listen and say, "That sounds difficult," rather than immediately attacking his wife or telling him how to handle the relationship. To him, that may feel like extraordinary understanding, but sometimes it is simply healthy distance, and this is where the situation can become dangerous. A married man may begin interpreting her neutrality as emotional permission. Because she does not push him away dramatically, he assumes she welcomes deeper involvement. Because she listens, he assumes she is emotionally invested. Because she does not judge him, he may convince himself that she understands him in a special way. But silence is not consent. Kindness is not romantic interest. And emotional neutrality is not an invitation. Her refusal to interfere with his life may actually be her way of respecting boundaries. The deeper problem begins when he takes the freedom she gives him and uses it as an excuse to enter territory she never offered. He may think, "She understands me." She may simply be thinking, "Your marriage is your responsibility." That difference can completely change the meaning of their interaction. Sometimes the most powerful misunderstanding is created when one person offers emotional space and the other person mistakes that space for an open door. Number 5. Emotional intelligence without the drama. One of the most misunderstood forms of attraction is the feeling of being emotionally understood without having to defend yourself. A married man may talk to a woman about his frustrations, disappointments, or personal struggles, expecting the conversation to become complicated. Instead, she listens. She does not immediately become angry on his behalf. She does not insult his wife. She does not turn his problem into her personal crisis. She simply listens, asks thoughtful questions, and gives him room to explain himself. That can feel incredibly powerful, especially if his marriage has become emotionally exhausting. After years of arguments, repeated disagreements, responsibilities, and conversations that seem to go nowhere, sitting with someone who can hear a difficult story without immediately adding more emotional weight can feel like breathing fresh air. But here is where we need to be brutally honest. Being listened to is not the same thing as being loved. A man can feel deeply connected to someone simply because he feels calmer around her. He may leave their conversations thinking, "She understands me in a way nobody else does." Maybe she does, but there is another possibility. Maybe what he is experiencing is relief. Think about someone who has been carrying a heavy bag all day. When they finally put it down, the relief can feel wonderful. But that does not mean the flaw is the love of their life. The same thing can happen emotionally. If his existing relationship has become stressful, the calmness he experiences around another woman can feel like extraordinary chemistry. He may begin attaching romantic meaning to a feeling that is actually telling him something about his emotional environment. And this is where emotionally intelligent people become especially powerful without trying to be. They do not have to rescue you to make you feel heard. They do not have to agree with everything you say. They simply give you enough space to hear yourself clearly. Sometimes people do not fall in love with the person who understands them. They fall in love with the relief they feel while being understood, and confusing those two things can completely distort what is actually happening between them. Number 6. He may feel safer. Fantasizing about an unavailable woman. Sometimes the person who feels safest to fantasize about is the person you can never realistically have. That sounds strange, but think about what happens when attraction meets real availability. Suddenly, there are decisions to make. If two people are genuinely available, attraction can move beyond imagination and become a real relationship. Then, reality arrives with all its questions. What do we actually want? Are we compatible? What happens when we disagree? What are we willing to sacrifice? What does this relationship look like on an ordinary Tuesday? Fantasy does not have to answer any of those questions. A married man may become fascinated by a woman who is distant, emotionally private, or clearly outside his reach. He can imagine conversations, emotional closeness, romantic possibilities, and an entirely different life without having to experience the difficult parts of making that life real. That is what makes fantasy so comfortable. For example, he may imagine that this woman would understand him perfectly because their conversations have always been easy. He may imagine that they would never argue because they have never had the opportunity to deal with real pressure together. He may imagine that she would bring excitement into his life because he has only experienced her in limited, carefully defined moments. But he has never seen her dealing with stress, disappointment, financial pressure, exhaustion, insecurity, or everyday responsibilities. He is filling in the missing pieces himself. And that is the dangerous part. The less reality he has with her, the more room his imagination has to write the story. He may believe he is protecting himself by keeping the relationship in his head. In reality, he may be protecting the fantasy from reality. Because reality has a way of asking questions fantasy can avoid. Would they actually work together? Would the attraction survive ordinary life? Would she even want the relationship he has imagined? And most importantly, would he still want her if she stopped being an idea and became a real person with flaws, needs, boundaries, and expectations? Sometimes the fantasy feels perfect because reality has never been allowed to challenge it. The fantasy is safe precisely because nothing has happened yet. Number 7. She may represent a challenge to his self-image. A man who believes he is attractive, influential, intelligent, or socially powerful may encounter a Sigma woman who simply doesn't respond to those qualities in the expected way. Suddenly, his usual tools don't work. Sometimes attraction begins with a compliment to the ego, not the heart. A married man may be used to receiving a certain reaction from people around him. Perhaps he is successful, confident, well-dressed, financially comfortable, socially respected, or simply accustomed to being considered attractive. Over time, those things can become part of how he measures his own worth. Then he meets a woman who does not react the way he expects. He makes a joke, and she barely reacts. He tries to impress her, and she remains completely normal. He mentions his achievements, and she does not suddenly become fascinated. He gives her attention, and she does not appear desperate to keep it. Suddenly, something changes inside him. Instead of thinking, she is not interested, he may start thinking, Why can't I affect her? That question can become surprisingly powerful. For example, a man who is used to getting enthusiastic responses might make several attempts to impress her. Each time she remains composed, the challenge becomes more interesting. He may begin paying closer attention to her, looking for signs that she finally notices him. At this point, attraction can quietly become competition. He is no longer simply wondering whether he likes her. He is wondering whether he can make her like him. And those are completely different motivations. The uncomfortable truth is that some people chase what challenges their self-image because they want proof that they still have the power they believe they possess. The woman becomes a test. If she eventually responds, he gets an emotional reward that says, "I still have it." But if she never responds, the obsession can sometimes become even stronger because the unanswered challenge remains unfinished. That does not automatically mean his feelings are fake. He may genuinely find her attractive. But genuine attraction and wounded pride can exist at the same time. This is why a man needs to ask himself a difficult question. If she had shown interest immediately, would I still be this fascinated by her? If the answer is no, then perhaps he was not chasing a relationship. He was chasing a reaction. And sometimes what looks like romance from the outside is simply wounded ego wearing romantic clothing. Number 8. She can become the container for everything missing in his current life. This is perhaps the most dangerous psychological mechanism. Sometimes a person does not become attractive because of everything they actually bring into your life. They become attractive because of everything you already feel is missing from it. This can happen when a married man has been quietly unhappy for a long time. Maybe his marriage has become predictable. Maybe communication has broken down. Maybe he feels emotionally ignored, unappreciated, restricted, or simply tired of living the same routine. Then another woman appears. She is different. She laughs differently. She talks about things his wife never talks about. She seems independent, interesting, mysterious, exciting, or intellectually stimulating. Suddenly his mind starts connecting dots. He thinks, "She makes me feel alive again." And that sentence can be dangerous, because perhaps she did not actually create that feeling. Perhaps the feeling was already buried inside him, waiting for somewhere to go. She becomes the container for everything he misses. Excitement gets attached to her. Freedom gets attached to her. Emotional understanding gets attached to her. Adventure gets attached to her. Even his frustration with his marriage can start making her look more extraordinary than she really is. For example, imagine a man who has felt bored with his routine for years. He meets a woman who travels, reads widely, has unusual opinions, and lives differently from him. He may start thinking she represents the exciting life he should have had, but he has only seen selected pieces of her life. He has not experienced her bad moods, disappointments, complicated habits, financial problems, insecurities, or ordinary boring days. He knows the highlight reel and compares it to the full documentary of his marriage. That is an unfair comparison. The woman may genuinely be interesting. The attraction may be real. But she may also have become a screen onto which he projects everything he wishes his life contained. And this is where honesty matters. Before saying, "She is everything I have been missing," he needs to ask a much harder question. Was she really missing from my life, or was something missing inside my life before I ever met her? Because sometimes the new person is not the answer. Sometimes they simply reveal the question that was already there. Number 9. She can trigger his need to be seen as an individual, again. Sometimes what a person misses most in a long relationship is not romance. It is the feeling of being seen as an individual. Years of marriage can naturally create roles: husband, father, provider, decision-maker, the person who handles certain responsibilities. These roles are important, but they can slowly become so familiar that the individual underneath them receives less attention. Then another woman comes along and responds to something completely different. She laughs at his strange sense of humor. She becomes interested in an idea he has been thinking about. She notices his knowledge about something nobody at home seems interested in. She asks questions about his ambitions rather than his responsibilities. Suddenly, he feels noticed in a different way. That can be incredibly refreshing. For example, imagine a man who spends most of his days discussing work, bills, family plans, and household responsibilities. Then he meets someone who becomes fascinated by his photography, his business idea, his love of history, or the way he thinks about certain subjects. He may leave that conversation thinking, "She really gets me." But does she? Maybe she simply noticed a part of him that has not received much attention lately. That distinction matters. Being freshly noticed can feel intensely personal because it reminds someone that they are more than the role they perform every day. But feeling interesting to someone does not automatically mean the two people are emotionally compatible. This is where attraction can become misleading. A married man may compare the excitement of being newly discovered with the familiarity of being deeply known. One feels fresh and stimulating. The other contains years of ordinary life, shared responsibilities, disagreements, forgiveness, memories, and reality. Of course, being known and being appreciated are both important, but they are not the same experience. The new woman may not actually understand him better than his wife does. She may simply be meeting a version of him that his marriage has stopped noticing. And that can create a powerful illusion. He may think he has finally found someone who sees the real him. Sometimes, what he has actually found is someone who reminded him that the real him was still there. That is a meaningful discovery. But it does not automatically mean she is the person he should build a life with. Number 10. She can become a symbol of the life he never chose. Sometimes a person becomes attractive because they seem to represent a life you never lived. A married man may meet an independent woman and notice something that has very little to do with romance at first. She may travel often, make unusual choices, have a different career, live simply, take risks, or structure her life around freedom in a way he never did. And suddenly, she becomes more than a person. She becomes a possibility. He may start wondering what his life would have looked like if he had made different choices. What if he had taken that job? What if he had traveled more? What if he had stayed single longer? What if he had built his life around freedom instead of responsibility? The woman becomes attached to those questions. For example, a married man who feels trapped in a predictable routine may meet a woman who spends her weekends traveling, learning new skills, starting projects, or simply living according to her own priorities. He may begin thinking, "She is living the life I always wanted." But notice what happened. He moved from observing her life to imagining his life through her. That is a completely different thing. He may not actually know whether they would function well together. He may not know how she handles conflict, money, disappointment, commitment, family pressure, or ordinary boredom. He has seen enough of her freedom to attach his own unanswered desires to her. She becomes a symbol. She represents adventure when he feels stuck, freedom when he feels restricted, youth when life feels repetitive, possibility when his choices feel permanent, and that can make the attraction incredibly intense. But symbols are dangerous because they are rarely held to the same standards as real people. A real woman has flaws. A symbol does not. A real relationship has responsibilities. A fantasy can remain effortless. A real person can disappoint you. An imagined future cannot. This is why a married man may believe he is falling for a woman when he is actually grieving the versions of himself he never became. She may represent the road not taken. And sometimes the hardest truth is realizing that you do not necessarily want the person standing in front of you. You want the life you imagine you could have had if you had taken a different road. In final words, sometimes the person who fascinates you most is not the person you truly want. Sometimes they simply reveal something you have been missing. And that may be the most honest way to understand why some married men become unusually attracted to independent, private, emotionally intelligent women. It is not necessarily because she's better than single women. It is not because she possesses some magical quality that makes married men powerless. Often, the attraction says as much about the man's emotional situation as it does about the woman herself. She may represent novelty when his life feels repetitive. She may provide calm when his relationship feels emotionally exhausting. Her independence may make him feel interesting without requiring him to perform. Her distance may give his imagination room to create an entire story around someone he barely knows. And sometimes he is not falling for her at all. He is falling for how he feels around her. That distinction can save people from making serious mistakes. Because fantasy has no bills, arguments, responsibilities, bad moods, or ordinary Tuesdays. Real relationships have all of those things. So if a married man finds himself unusually consumed by another woman, the wiser question is not, what makes her so irresistible? It is, what is this attraction revealing about me, my marriage, and the life I am currently living? That question may be uncomfortable, but uncomfortable questions often lead to more honest answers. And God bless you